So, good afternoon to everybody. Welcome. Let me introduce myself. My name is Eduardo Vigna. I'm a journalist. I work for Corriere della Sera. I'm responsible for the area dedicated to the environment and sustainability and circular economy. But today we are here to reflect about one very important thing about human rights and duties in the third millennium. This is the title of our event. This is organized by ICHD, the International Council of Human Duties at University of Trieste, in collaboration with the United World College of the Adriatic and Fondazione CR7 Trieste. We are here to celebrate just a few minutes. I swear that I won't take more than a few minutes. We're here to celebrate an important anniversary. 30 years ago, 1991, remember, I'll try to underline some small things, but it's important. Remember the year, 1991. Rita Levi-Montalcini was awarded the honoris causa degree in medicine by the University of Trieste. Trieste is one more important thing. On that day, the great Italian scientist gave a memorable speech, Lectio Magistralis, entitled Rights and Duties of Man as we near the third millennium. It was an appeal to the international scientific community to draft a Magna Carta of duties with along the lines of the most important international charts on human rights, appealed the man of science supported by the man of politics to identify the duties, which mean the today we say also the responsibilities, one important word again, in the field of science and its related technological application. The history, we can say today, went on, and 2 years later, the Carta was declared, and we had the Trieste Declaration of Human Duties with 12 principles, with articles adopted, and also it was created at the University of Trieste, the International Council of Human Duties, which is still important. So I underline a couple more things. First of all, the ideas. Ideas walk on men's legs. We used to say this, but it's important because we must remember the day. Of course, we remember the day in which the declaration was finally adopted, but it's important, more important, and for everybody, it's important to know that it's important the day in which seeds were planted by Rita Levi-Montalcini. And because it's important to plant seeds to have all the important things we can create, we can build. Number two, words, as I told you, are important. Rights and duties are in the title, at the center of the lecture by Rita Levi-Montalcini. And rights and duties are two sides of the same medal. Now we can say together, we can synthesize in a word, responsibilities. And in these days, and one more word, actuality, the actuality of that Carta is important. It's not because I'm a journalist, but I want to say that if you read the Carta, you can see some expression that are very important, because now we are aware, now in the middle of the pandemic by COVID-19, we realize more than before, much more than before, how much is important our individual and collective, but individual behavior, and because we have consequences. Rights and duties, we have responsibilities. Third point, last point, it's still again about actuality. If you read the declaration, it's incredible. It was 1991, 30 years ago. We had no smartphone, we had no tablet, we had no Netflix, we had nothing of the all things that we live together. In 1991, if we read principle number 7, 8, 9, 10, I want to read very shortly, but very number 7, support actions for an equitable distribution of world resources. Number 8, avoid energy waste and work for reduction of the use of fossil fuels. Promote the use of inexhaustible energy sources, representing a minimum of environmental and health risks. Number 9, protect nature from pollution and abuse. Promote conservation of natural resources and restore the restoration of degraded environments. And number 10, just for a few examples, respect and preserve the genetic diversity of living organisms and promote constant scrutiny of the application of genetic technologies. So you can see how much was incredibly near to the future 30 years before. But I don't want to take more time than necessary. So let's go directly into the event. And as I told you, Trieste is the epicenter of all the system I was talking about. So let me introduce you Roberto Di Lenarda, rector of the University of Trieste. Who better than him can talk to us of this issue? So please, Professor Di Lenarda, welcome and thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vigna. Good afternoon to all of you. It's my pleasure to welcome all the participants of the web meeting on human rights and duties in the third millennium from the same auditorium in which exactly 30 years ago, Rita Levi-Montalcini was awarded the title of Doctor Honoris Causa in Medicine by Rector of the University of Trieste, Giacomo Borruso. On that occasion, instead of talking about pure scientific notions, such as the saga of the nerve growth factor, as one her books is entitled, in her doctorate lesson, as we say, she unexpectedly talked about human rights and duties on the threshold of the third millennium. Following my introduction, Sergio Paletti, a friend of mine, the president of the International Council of Human Duties, will examine in depth the genesis of her idea of issuing a Magna Carta of human duties based on the sacredness of life, of all forms of life, from mankind to that of all that the living beings coexisting on the globe. I instead would like to underline some aspects of her appeal and her tireless activity in the years following 1991, with particular interest towards her relation with Trieste University. She once said that on the threshold of the third millennium, scientists claim their right to intervene in a field that in the past was considered to be exclusively reserved to philosophers and theologians, an example, the field of values. The essence of university is primarily that of spreading knowledge and science to students and the young generation. But differing from other scientists, Levi-Montalcini focuses, as she said, on the importance for new generation to rightfully take part in the implementation of those new programs. During her career, she wrote books and articles and gave talks to encourage the young generation to be brave, to sail without oil and upwind, citing the title of one of her books. But she also urged young people to be strongly committed in their life. Quoting Don Lorenzo Milani, a great educator, she firmly believed in his words, "I care." This to mean that commitment has been the discriminating feature of Homo sapiens since the oldest time. As far as the city of Trieste is concerned, she once said that the city of Trieste is an ideal location to achieve such a project because it is situated in the melting point of several cultures. Besides, the city proved to have a strong awareness in facing problems at international level, by hosting the International Center of Theoretical Physics and by offering its chair to the great scientist Abdul Salam, Nobel Prize for Physics. Last but not least, Trieste earned the title of European Capital of Science in 2020, hosting the Euroscience Open Forum and making it a great success in spite of the great difficulties which came along with the pandemic. As of 2020, relaunch Rita Levi-Montalcini appeals, dedicating an hybrid session on September the 5th to the Trieste Declaration of Human Duties. As final remark, please allow me to stress a specific aspect of the relation between the Trieste University and Rita Levi-Montalcini, pertaining both to her being a medical doctor and to the School of Medicine of Trieste. The proposal of conferring upon her the degree honoris causa came from the Faculty of Medicine of Trieste University to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the foundation of the School of Medicine by awarding the prestigious title to a great woman. She succeeded in enrolling in the School of Medicine in Turin against the will of her father, in graduating and in carrying on her studies in neurobiology, in spite of difficulties and obstacles coming from a racist regime and a terminal war. The School of Medicine has then become the Department of Medicine and Surgery, and as further sign of respect and gratitude, dedicate the new big auditorium to Rita Levi-Montalcini. It is my pleasure to recall that I personally took part in that ceremony as the head of the department, together with the by the time acting rector, Sergio Pauletti. We are here today together once again to reaffirm the will to keep on supporting Rita Levi-Montalcini's vision. Thank you very much.
Sorry. At this point, we were supposed to have a message by Massimiliano Fedriga, the president of Friuli Venezia Giulia, for the institutional greetings to the event. Unfortunately, his agenda was too busy, and he tried to record the message, but it couldn't possible to be done. So we welcome now, it's time to welcome Sergio Pauletti, our guest, president of the International Council of Human Duties, who came across before, and who were involved from the beginning in the project. And as a journalist, I must say that I'm tempted to ask more things about how was it at the time, etc. But I think it's more important to talk about the declaration in order to better understand the value of this document and the actual value. So welcome, Sergio Pauletti.
Good afternoon, everybody.
So can I anyway make a question, and then I'll leave you?
Yeah, sure. Sure. I think.
Would you like to briefly summarize the intervention of Rita Levi-Montalcini on the occasion of the award of the degree, and the genesis, the subsequent genesis of the Trieste Declaration of Human Duties?
Yes, thank you. It was an unexpected conference because everybody expected her to talk about the nerve growth factor. But she started from the main, how to say, topic, or one of the most important feature in the past 2 centuries, which is the consciousness of human rights. She started from the American Revolution, then through the French Revolution, and then ending to the Declaration of San Francisco in 1948. But she said that over the years, there was a kind of misinterpretation of the idea of right. giving to somebody and to some societies the unjustified right to spoil resources or abuse nature or so. So following the suggestion of a friend of her, Roger Sperry, who also got the Nobel Prize a couple of years before her, she suggested that time should be to go for a universal declaration of human duties, where the duty is not a law obligation, is not somehow the police to force somebody to make something, but the duty is better translated with responsibility. Famous sentence by Immanuel Kant, that the stars above us and the moral law in us. So in other words, we could say it is my duty to fight for your right. This is the essence. And on the first row here in the big auditorium where together with the rector we are sitting now, Abdul Salam was really excited. So two Nobel laureates, one in medicine, one in physics, at the same time joined together and decided to start a big adventure, which involved 16 Nobel laureates over the years and more than 80 famous academicians from all over the world. And by the end of 93, issued this declaration in 12 points. Later on, the declaration was spread in very many places of the world, and if not clearly identified, but certainly you can even find wording and sentences in the Millennium Declaration of the United Nations Assembly for the third millennium. So this was the seed. This was the starting idea. And discussing with many friends and colleagues, mostly scientists, but also businessmen and politicians, it would be a great thing if in 2023, when we shall celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Declaration of Human Rights in 48, the United Nations could twin this Declaration of Human Rights with that on human duties.
I do it the same in the meeting here at newspaper. I always forget to. You were saying that it was mainly scientists, also with other with politicians and businessmen, but it was scientists who contributed to the preparation of the draft of the declaration. Do you think that it's a peculiarity of of this declaration compared to the others, and what role do you think scientists can play in supporting a relaunch of the declaration, as you said, also in the next years?
Yes, there have been a couple of similar initiatives led by politicians in one case and by some philosophers and moral leaders on the others, which are of course very respectful. But I mean, the strength of the Declaration of Trieste is that it is based on the thinking of distinguished scientists in all fields, from physics, from chemistry, economy, and medicine, physiology. So all realized that we are, for the first time in the history of mankind, we are getting the possibility of destroying humanity and destroying the earth. So this is something that it is matter of scientific evidence, because you can even measure how many times we could destroy our Earth. So the scientists are not motivated by individual or political or ideological reasons. They just try to discover Earth secrets and in general for the benefit of mankind.
I have one more question for you. And how does the Trieste Declaration on Human Duties relate to other similar declarations previous, for example, the limits of development by the Club of Rome, or most important, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the Agenda 2030?
In the little book which was published by the Trieste University Press with the declaration, there is plenty of, it is organized like a scientific publication. So there are plenty of quotations or previous work. So those scientists who prepared the declaration did not believe to be the first in a row, but they knew that there were tens of declarations. They are quoted there. I mean, there is a famous one of the limits of the development of the Club of Rome, and then the Helsinki Declaration, several declarations by United Nations on the environment, the Rio Declaration, the Stockholm Declaration, and so on. So all those declarations have been, how to say, distilled and put together into this declaration. And at the same time, when I first met Jeffrey Sachs, he was excited and saying, this is, in a way, this declaration is the missing link that I didn't know between all the previous declarations and the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. So every point, each of the 12 points of the declaration is connected to 2 or 3 or sometimes 4 different Sustainable Development Goals. So the interpenetration is total.
Yeah, that's very important. That's very important for us. Thank you, Sergio Paoletti. Then we can go on to the talk, which is the center of the event today. Before doing this, I want to underline one more thing. That I believe it's important to introduce all the people who are going to talk, because if you look at the introduction of the declaration, it's interesting to say that the declaration says that scientists are obligated to pay a tithe on their knowledge by sacrificing a portion of their career in order to make an informed contribution to the public debate on vital issues or our time, on which depends the survival of mankind. But I think it's interesting to look on one more thing. Rita Levi-Montalcini and those who wrote the code had in mind one crucial thing, the importance of younger generation. It's written in the introduction also, but it's explicit. It refers to the necessity of participation, which is an important word inside the word democracy. Young people today can be disappointed sometimes. I have my daughters are the same age of the students who are going to talk today, and I see that they sometimes are frustrated and disappointed because they see that the grown-up people, the adult people, seems not to be really interested in what they're saying, what they think, and what they are going to do. But I think that the young people, I always say to my daughters, that you have to discriminate. You have to see the difference between people who are interested and people who are not. The declaration says clearly that it's important, the participation of the students. And today we have girls and boys by the United World College of the Adriatic, who is going to help us and to show that it's true, that it's real. So let's time to start with the event, the talk on the future on human rights, duties, and science. This is the title. And at the center of the stage, there are three directors of three international research institutes, which are based in Trieste. And they will dialogue with the students of the United College of Adriatic. And our guests today are Lawrence Banks, Director General at ICGEB, International Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology. Welcome. Atish Dabolkar, the Director at ICTP, the Abdul Salam International Center for Theoretical Physics. Welcome to you. And Stefano Ruffo, Director at CISA, International School for Advanced Studies. Welcome, Professor Ruffo.
Thank you for the invitation.
And on the other side, we would say, in a match, on the other side, we have to ask the question and to dissolve their curiosities that are very, very interesting. Girls and boys by the UWC Adriatic. And because it wouldn't be possible online to have questions by all the students, so that we have three of them on behalf of their fellow students that will make the questions to the professors. Emma Talbizonetti, welcome, Emma. Michael Flickman, welcome, Michael.
No, thank you.
And Giacomo, where are you?
I'm here.
Giacomo Yoncuomo, you are, welcome.
Thank you, Eduardo.
And I know that you will start with a question, the same question for each of them, each of the professors. Then you will make questions to the different professors. And I know also that Professor Banks will need to leave us at 4 o'clock, and because he has an important, he needs to go. And but we thank him for being here with us anyway. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry I have to leave a little early.
No, absolutely. Thank you for being with us before. Thank you, really. One last thing. At the end of the event, we will have one more message, but we collect all the questions. And I don't know if we will have time to make all the questions by the public to the professors, but we'll try anyway. And so we can start. I envy you because I'd like to make the questions myself. I always make questions in my life, so but I'm happy to give you the possibility to do so. I don't know who will start.
I will start.
Okay, fine, Giacomo.
Thank you, Eduardo, for the introduction. So my name is Giacomo Yoncuomo. I'm from Italy and Singapore, and I'm a second year of UWC Adriatic. So before we start with the question, I think I can speak for all the three of us students, saying that we are really glad to be here as representatives of our college, and we are glad to participate in this important conference. So before I pass the word to Emma for the first question to the three directors, I would gladly request to the directors and remind them that to answer as briefly as possible to the questions due to the limited time that has been granted to us. So thank you, and Emma, the floor is yours.
Hello, so I'm Emma. I'm a first year from France and Italy. And I have a first question that's general for all of the directors. So what is the role of sciences in regard to human duties?
I think that we can go in the order I gave to you before. So Professor Banks first, then Professor Dabolkar, and then
and Professor Ruffo.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd just really like to just take this opportunity to thank Sergio for the invitation to be here today. It really is a very great pleasure. I was also wondering about this particular question, and when I heard the term responsibilities that Eduardo mentioned at the very beginning, I think that summarizes it perfectly, and how that links to the Sustainable Development Goals. When you look at the declaration, it is essentially a list of the SDGs. And so if you think about this in terms of health, nutrition, equality, economic security, all the things that underlie a lot of the major world's problems, these are all part of what we would call human duties or responsibilities. And you're only going to solve those problems through science. There's absolutely no way that we're going to move forward on the vast majority of these issues if you don't have a scientific endeavor to make those breakthroughs. For instance, look at COVID-19. The speed with which the vaccine has been developed is quite remarkable. Now what we need to do is to ensure that it's distributed equitably. And these are the challenges. But again, it's through cooperation and scientific collaboration that you can begin to fulfill some of these challenges. And I would say that, you know, from a biologist's perspective, what we can achieve through things like genome editing, development of GMOs, you can feed the world. You can remove a lot of the problems that underline the abuses and the problems that we see around the world. And probably for me, and I'll come back to this in later, perhaps the most fundamental is education, and educating our populations such that in an equal and open manner, so that you remove bigotry and prejudice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sachs. Professor Double-Car, please.
Okay, if you don't mind, I would like to start with a remark of my great compatriot Mahatma Gandhi, which I think is particularly relevant today, is that he said that a duty well performed creates a corresponding right. And the important phrase is corresponding right. Because for Gandhi, duty and right were always interlinked. And this, his philosophical position was actually very contrasts with the rhetoric of, in the philosophy, in the Western philosophy of Locke and Rousseau, which underlies only rights, for example, in the Western constitutions. And in fact, it's interesting that Gandhi was approached by Julian Huxley in 1947, the Director General of UNESCO, at the time of framing of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And at that time he wrote, I just want to read these 3 lines because they're very important. The very right to live, so he was talking about the right to life, accrues to us only when we do the duty of citizenship of the world. From this one fundamental statement, perhaps it is easy enough to define the duties of man and woman and correlate every right to some corresponding duty to be first performed. Every other right can be shown to be usurpation, hardly worth fighting for. And I think this distinction is very fundamental. And it's really, if you look at the excesses and misery of our time, it can be traced to the excessive emphasis on rights at the exclusion of duties, or excessive concentration of wealth and power, or the destruction of our ecosystem. It can be traced back to the idea that we have the right to amass great wealth or live in great comfort at the expense of everything else, as one wishes, with no corresponding duty to our fellow citizens. So I think it's very appropriate. I'm very happy that in the Universal Declaration of Duties, we're bringing back the focus, re-emphasizing human duties, because I think this is really the fundamental challenge of the 21st century, that it is very natural to have a notion of inalienable duties which accompany the inalienable right to, for example, in the American Constitution, to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. There should be a corresponding inalienable right, duty. So I'm very happy that actually Sergio kindly invited me to this meeting. And I think therefore the Trieste Declaration and the role of the International Council of Human Duties is particularly important. And coming to scientists, I believe that scientists not only have rights, but they are in fact have privileges. So in fact, their duties are correspondingly bigger. And in my opinion, the fundamental duty, of course, of a scientist is to perform their work with integrity. But corresponding to it as a citizen, they must devote part of their time to engaging with the citizenry. And I believe that in the current time, what is required is a fact-based notion of development, which is compassionate, and to uphold the enlightenment values that underline science, because I believe that they have been eroded quite substantially in the recent times, partly because of fake news or partly because of the perhaps an elitist culture of scientists themselves. So I believe this is our fundamental duty as scientists. And I'm very happy that ICTP is in a very important way engaged in fulfilling this fundamental duty, because if you really want SDGs to be delivered, it is very important that access to science is also universal. I mean, science is a common heritage of all humankind, but access to science is not available to everybody. So what we really need is to create this culture of science without borders. This is a precondition for any steps towards realizing the strategic development goals. I will stop here and maybe we can.
Thanks, Professor Doublecur. Professor Ruffo, if you can answer.
Sorry, I am mute. Yes, of course, as you have noticed, we knew in advance the questions, and as any good students, we have prepared the answers. But I must say that I was really shocked by the Gandhi citation, because it's very hard for me to say any more on that level and with the same precision and profound thinking that is expressed in the quote of Gandhi. But I will try anyway to go on with go along with the question, which has to do with the role of sciences regarding human uses. First of all, it's very important to remark that sciences include not only the hard sciences but also humanities, and that's a very, very broad concept of the sciences that I would foster and encourage. And another relation that I would like to pinpoint is the one between science and democracy. That was, it is no accident, in fact, that the very virtues that make democracy work also to make science work. So as Sheila Yazanov, one of the founders of the discipline of science and technology studies, declared, a commitment to reason and transparency, an openness to critical scrutiny, a skepticism towards claims that too neatly report Iranian values, a willingness to listen to countervailing opinions, a readiness to admit uncertainty and ignorance, and the respect for evidence gathered according to the sanctioned best practices of the moment. These are words that tell us that science should have for the public, for the general public, also a phase where it is able to speak to people in a modest way. I must say that during the pandemic, I was very much impressed by the way Anthony Fauci was making his declarations. So it was always clear what it was honest to say to the general public, and what were the limits of the scientific discourse, and what could not be said, and what was left to ignorance. It was really an example for me of clarity of this position of the scientist. This is my little contribution to your question.
Thank you, Director Ruffo. I think now Michal has a question for Director Banks.
Yes, my question is going to be for Director Banks. And in cases in which science is used in a harmful or an unethical way, it contradicts the principles of human duties. And my question is, where would you place the boundaries of what is justified by the drive for knowledge and what isn't?
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think everything can be used in a bad way. And I think you have to be extremely careful that you don't restrict scientific research, because there is a potential that somebody can use it in the way that it wasn't originally intended. Unfortunately, this is the way the world is. We cannot predict how everything is going to develop. Clearly, the research itself needs to be properly ethically controlled, and certainly should not undermine any of the rights and duties of human individuals that we would all take for granted. And for these reasons, there's very strict regulations in terms of ethical committees to monitor what scientists do and to ensure that it follows an appropriate code of practice. So in a nutshell, I would say you cannot restrict scientific endeavor because it might have a bad side effect, but you should obviously control it very rigorously in terms of ethics and rights and duties for the individual concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now we would like to ask to Professor Doublecard a question a little bit different from the past one about education. So what, in your opinion, potential ethical issues arise due to the way technology has transformed the field of education?
I think with technology, there are new possibilities, but also new challenges. I think, as I see, the fundamental role for scientists is to make, or scientific organizations, is to make access to science universally available, because that is going to be crucial in the years to come. Otherwise, we will only create a dependent culture in the developing world where things are produced elsewhere and they are only consumers. So if you really want, and this is a point that was very well appreciated by our founding director, Salam, and this continues to be a very important point even today, that somehow access to science, access to education is very important. And technology has actually made it easier in some ways, because we can connect now to people away from far away on Zoom, like we are doing now. But actually in many places like in Africa or in Asia, still access to internet is not as what we think. So even though you might have this whole stream of knowledge available on the internet, people are not able to access it. So making that available is actually the first thing that you have to do. But even after you have done that, actually more important than internet is access to real science. And that is not easy. That's not easy to communicate. It's not, you really need physical interaction or real involvement of real scientists. And it is really important that you're able to train people on the ground who can interact with students. And so that, I think, is the challenge. And if we fail to do that, then we will actually only increase the knowledge divide and therefore also the economic divide. So I think that is our ethical challenge.
Okay, thank you, Professor Dabokar.
Sorry, same question for me or?
No, so I have a question for you, which is, does the education system you work in give attention to the human duties?
Yes, so I must clarify, CISA is a PhD school, and we have students from many different countries, and researchers is from again from many continents and different countries, and we try to encourage the students, the PhD students, to be and to involve them in programs. I just would like to mention that we have a program it's called CISA for School, where we encourage the students, the PhD students, to help the visits of the students from all levels to CISA that happens every week. And also we have a day where the school is open to all the students of the region, and also from different regions, so that they try to understand what is really needed by the society, what is really needed by the common people. And also I would like to mention the activity of our interdisciplinary lab in science communication. I think these are some ingredients of an institution that I try to make as transparent as I can, because this is really very important that scientists and the educational system pay attention to the human duties through their commitments to building a human institutions. So these are institutions that use scientific knowledge in transparent, accessible, and reliable ways. And this is crucial in avoiding the risk of what I would call technocracy, which is the basis for a non-democratic and inhuman decisions.
Sorry, Professor Banks, do you have time for one more question? Yes?
Yes, sure.
Giacomo
Okay. So I have another question, which is a little bit more specific about the duties themselves. Do you feel like there's any duty from the list of human duties that is particularly important for you or for any of your work and research, or significant? And which one is it?
If I had to pick anything out that really stood out for me as being the most important, that would be access to equality in education for all. I think you young people, you're at one of the most outstanding educational establishments in the world, and you're extremely fortunate to have that opportunity. But this is something that we need as scientists to ensure is made available throughout the world. And one of the key points about science is education in the scientific process. And that's understanding the process by which you go through scientific discovery. That generates a very logical form of thinking. It's fact-based. You learn how to check your sources of information. You analyze, and based on your information, you make decisions and move forward. Unfortunately, the vast majority of the world's problems are exacerbated by ignorance. And so I think, you can't expect science to solve all the world's problems in one fell swoop. You have to approach it from many different angles. But I think if you can bring education to people, you can help them to analyze and be more, and check where the facts come from in a scientific manner, then you begin to make an impact. And so that for me would be the single biggest element that I would choose as being that could make the most difference throughout the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. For the next question to Professor Doublecar, it's more or less on the same note as for Professor Banks, is if in your opinion, is there anything you feel that is missing in the human duties that you would like to add?
No, I think the Universal Declaration of Human Duties has, I think it's quite exhaustive. If I were to say something a little bit utopian, I mean, I think really the most fundamental duty that is facing our generation, and I think Eduardo talked about how the younger generation feels let down by the older generation for not actually providing the leadership on the most fundamental issues. And that really is the question of the survival of our species. I mean, it's not a joke that, and it's not alarmist thinking. Really, in a few decades, we are facing a crisis of the kind that humanity has never experienced. And I think it is our responsibility as scientists to make the public aware of this as much as possible. And there is a question about world leaders. I really think that one of the most fundamental human duty is to ensure the preservation of the human species and to ensure the preservation of our ecosystem. And it's the sort of the elephant in the room is the enormous defense spending that we are spending on defending against each other. But we should actually be defending against this major crisis that is actually the enemy for all of us. So I think what we really need is a kind of Earth Defense Fund. And actually Jeffrey Sachs is on the panel. Maybe he can, and he's an advisor to the United Nations. But if all the countries agreed to spend even 20% of their defense budget on defending the Earth rather than defending themselves against an imaginary enemy, you would have €500 billion every year to spend on really ecology. And I think scientists can play a big role there because they can really be the advocates for this. I know this is utopian in the current atmosphere, but perhaps if one starts talking about it, maybe it will reach somewhere.
Thank you, Professor Doublecar. Emma, now for Professor Ruffo's next question.
Yeah. So nowadays we experience a lot of fake news and an overflow of information. So what role do scientists have in preventing the spread of misinformation?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. In fact, I think one should not use the term fake news. So this expression, I think, is misleading. In fact, it's also used sometimes to denigrate journalists and the media. I think it's more correct to speak about information disturbances, which better grasps the complexity of the actions that pollute the information ecosystem with deliberate actions that aim at destabilizing it. So this is a premise which serves to overcome a somewhat naive approach to which you reply to fake news with fact checking. In fact, we should recognize that those who use the media to create these disturbances, they have a very sophisticated strategies, and to these strategies we should reply with in a multidisciplinary perspective and with education, with knowledge of technology, of the media. So I think that as we are speaking of the post-pandemic situation as a sort of new normal, we should also speak of what is the situation now in a world polluted by these disturbances. So we have to develop ourselves, our response to this new world, like we protect against the sun with cream. So so we protect against these disturbances, and we are able to critically understand what's going on. And this critical thinking is also another aspect where scientists can give a very important contribution.
Thanks, Professor Ruffo, for your answer.
Okay, my next question is for Professor Dabukar, and it also relates a little bit to Stefano's answer. The current pandemic has created a lot of great disparities, from access to education to access to vaccinations, which has been very relevant in the past few months. What actions would you suggest world leaders take so human duties are respected in these complex times?
Yeah, so I sort of, I think, refer to this question. And in fact, I think the question should be formulated a bit differently because, you know, human duties are not respected, but human duties are performed, whereas human rights are respected. And human duties, therefore, have to be performed by all of us. So the question really is that what is the duty of a world leader who is representing the opinion of all the humans in his or her state? And as I said, I think we think of the pandemic as the biggest challenge humanity has faced. But I really think nuclear holocaust and climate. I mean, if you are aware, the atomic scientists have moved this clock very close to midnight, much closer to midnight than it has ever been in the last 50 years. So really addressing that issue collectively, I think world leaders have to say that, okay, I would rather protect New York against rising sea levels in 30 years rather than an imaginary attack from some missile coming from China. I think it's much more certain that there will be rising sea levels in a few years' time. And therefore, rather than spending literally trillions of dollars on protecting ourselves against these imaginary enemies, we should really focus our energies onto the real danger that faces humanity.
Thank you, Professor Dabukar. I think our last question for Stefano Ruffo is if there are ways in which you involve your university students in the application of human duties during lectures or other activities, for example.
Yeah, I was mentioning the programs that we have for schools of all level, or the debates that takes place within the interdisciplinary lab. But I must confess that we don't do enough, so we should do more. I think as the reaction of the students when I try to switch on and to push them to do something is very positive. So that they are, these are students that come from everywhere. So they have a very broad and open attitude. So as soon as I stimulate them, they react very, very positively. And definitely we should do more. And I will let this manifesto or Carta, as it was called, known to my students very soon, in such a way that they will discuss the points of this manifesto among themselves, and they will for sure come with very nice suggestions on actions to take.
Perfect. Thanks, Stefano Ruffo. Thanks to all the three directors for answering our questions. We are done for our part in the conference. So once again, we thank all the organizers to invite us for this conference. We are glad even more now to be representative of our college. And a special thanks to the three directors, the three professors, for answering so perfectly our question and our doubts about the topic of human duties. Eduardo Vigna, you can take over now.
Thank you, Giacomo. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Michal. We're perfect. So you are ready to take my job, and so next time you won't need me here. But now it was very interesting, and we add one more thing, and we now introduce an important speech by Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Of course, you know him. He is one of the most influential expert on sustainable development. He's a columnist, he's a writer. He's really, really important in economic development, global microeconomics, etc. And Sergio Pauletti named him before, and he has sent to us a message, and it's a message, as it was said, in which he links sustainability, science, politics, and it's important because the link between all these concepts and other concepts you were talking about, I think the links are really crucial. So we can listen to the video message by Professor Jeffrey Sachs.
I also want to thank my... Hello, I'm Jeffrey Sachs, University Professor at Columbia University and President of the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network. I really want to thank the Area Science Park of Trieste and United College of the Adriatic for inviting me to participate in this very, very important gathering. And I also want to thank my colleagues in the International Council of Human Rights for their great leadership and for the fact of this gathering, the 30th anniversary of the historic speech of Professor Rita Levi-Montalcini on the occasion of her honorary degree at Trieste University. And of course, we are gathered because on that occasion, Professor Levi-Montalcini gave a remarkable address on human rights and duties on the threshold of the third millennium. And that led to, in 1992, this very, very important document, the Trieste Declaration of Human Duties, a code of ethics of shared responsibilities. It's Professor Levi-Montalcini's great vision in this document that brings us together and gives us an opportunity to reflect on the very important, complex, challenging, and in some ways dire situation of the world 30 years after her very remarkable initiative was launched. And with the International Council of Human Duties, which carries forward her work, we really have the opportunity to put Professor Levi-Montalcini's vision into reality for that fact of the third millennium, which we now inhabit. So the challenge, as she laid out in her remarkable speech, is two main points. First, and I quote from the Trieste Declaration, "We risk making our planet uninhabitable through burgeoning overpopulation, modern war, ecological carelessness, and social neglect." and how poignant the words are 30 years later. All of these challenges are significant, and another war with the great pain and suffering is occurring right now in Israel and Gaza. So the threat of modern war and the misery that it causes is directly in our minds these hours. And the second point of the Trieste Declaration is her call on, quote, all scientists, our profession, as the declaration says, to accept a level of responsibility for public policy commensurate with the contemporary power of science. And how remarkable those words are in the context of COVID-19. The scientists have done something absolutely stunning, and that is, within a short period of time, developed a number of effective vaccines to fight this pandemic. And it is our responsibility to ensure that those vaccines are available to all of the world in the most timely possible way to end this pandemic and to end the suffering that it has caused and the risks that it continues to impose. So the Trieste Declaration, in the inspiration of Professor Levi-Montalcini, was a call for a better world in the 21st century that could confront these massive disruptions of geopolitics, of environment, of social inequity, of continued extreme poverty and hunger in the midst of a world of plenty. Every word of her remarks 30 years ago and every one of the 12 points of the Trieste Declaration resonate with us today. Now, at the United Nations, it is my honor and responsibility to help promote the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'd like to speak about the Sustainable Development Goals in the context of the Trieste Declaration. The Trieste Declaration had 12 central points, including the need to address the massive crises of poverty and hunger and lack of access to basic healthcare services, to improve the quality of life, and to improve urban and rural regions in a context of environmental sustainability. It's a beautiful document and a powerful document that brings together the challenges of economic development, social justice, environmental sustainability, and global peace. And it is indeed those four dimensions which Professor Levi-Montalcini emphasized that I regard as the pillars of sustainable development. And this is the idea that I want to share with you in my brief remarks. It is our opportunity, it is our generation's responsibility to put into place sustainable development as a shared, global, guiding, and fundamental set of principles for human well-being in the 21st century. So what do I mean by sustainable development? Well, it's very much like what Professor Levi-Montalcini meant in her call for rights and duties in the 21st century. When I speak of sustainable development and when the Sustainable Development Goals open the future that we want, there are four basic pillars of sustainable development. The first is that economic well-being, and especially the core economic needs of enough nutritious food to eat, of safe water and sanitation, of access to basic infrastructure, electricity and zero polluting services, the access to healthcare and education should be available for all. This was a core point of the Trieste Declaration, and it is a core feature of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. In a way, you can think of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that were adopted by all 193 countries of the United Nations in September 2015 as a global call to action that it resonates entirely with the Trieste Declaration. So the first pillar of sustainable development and the Sustainable Development Goals is to meet economic needs for all. The second pillar is social justice, social inclusion, leaving no one behind and leaving no groups excluded in society. That means racial justice, it means gender equality, it means respect for ethnic groups, respect for indigenous populations, and respect for different cultures within a society and in different parts of the world. The third pillar of sustainable development, so obviously crucial for us, for our very survival, is environmental sustainability. I think all of us know well by now that we face not one, not two, not just three, but four fundamental, existential, environmental threats, all of them reflecting the effects of human activity on our finite planet. So these four massive environmental threats are: first, human-induced climate change, especially global warming and all that that is going to entail. Earth has already been warmed by human activity by 1.2 degrees Celsius compared with the pre-industrial temperature of the planet. And Earth continues to warm rapidly because of the emissions of greenhouse gases. The second huge human-induced crisis is the collapse in all parts of the world of biodiversity, of other species being driven to extinction or to near extinction by human activity. Overfishing, chopping down the rainforests, polluting the climate, harvesting too much tropical wood production, for example. And because of this very heavy burden of human beings on marine and land ecosystems, we have destroyed the habitat for millions of other species whose numbers are dropping dramatically. So we are losing biodiversity and driving other species towards extinction. The third incredible environmental threat, again human caused, is the massive pollution of the air, of the waters, of the soils, of the food chains on land and in the oceans, where the fish now have microplastics because the whole food chain of marine ecosystems are filled with plastics pollutions. So this has become a devastating source of threat. Millions of people die prematurely every year because of air pollution alone. And the fourth enormous threat is the one we're living through right now with COVID-19, and that is the increasing frequency of diseases passing from animal reservoirs to the human population. COVID-19 is a zoonosis, a disease from horseshoe bats that found its way into the human population. And we're experiencing more and more of those zoonotic diseases or zoonotic events. SARS was like that. MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, was a zoonosis. Ebola is a zoonotic disease in which fruit bats spread the Ebola pathogen to human beings. And now COVID-19 is spreading the SARS-CoV-2 virus from bats, presumably living resident in southwestern China and Southeast Asia, to human populations with the spread all over the world. So the environmental pillar, the third big pillar of sustainable development, includes 4 massive challenges. And the fourth pillar of sustainable development is global cooperation and living in peace with each other. Humanity has been living under the shadow or the Damocles sword of nuclear weapons since the very end of World War II. The Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union brought about a mass production and spread of nuclear weapons to tens of thousands of nuclear warheads around the world, especially in the US, Russia, China, France, UK, now India, Pakistan, Israel, where there has been an arms race, more and more nuclear weapon systems development, and continuing extraordinarily dangerous tensions between nuclear armed nations. And we know full well that this is the most basic existential threat, because nuclear war could eliminate all life on the planet, but certainly it could eliminate all human life. Well, I refer to this concept of sustainable development because I believe that it is the real expression of Professor Levi-Montalcini's call in the Trieste Declaration for rights and responsibilities for all of us, for our generation and for generations to come in the third millennium. The problem, as we all know, and the very reason for the Trieste Declaration and the very reason for the 193 UN member states adopting the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and then a few weeks after that, adopting the Paris Climate Agreement, and the reason for the 27 countries of Europe, of the European Union, adopting the European Green Deal, is that the world's economic, political, and social systems do not, by themselves, deliver sustainable development. In other words, there's nothing in the global market economic system or in the functioning of our politics in the European Union, the United States, China, Russia, or any of the major economies of the world, or in the way that we as individuals and in our linguistic, religious, and ethnic groups relate to each other. There is nothing that guarantees that the 4 pillars of sustainable development, shared economic prosperity, social justice, environmental sustainability, and global cooperation, are achieved. In fact, I would say not quite the contrary, but certainly we have no invisible hand, as is sometimes a phrase used to describe a market economy, that will guide us to sustainable development and to the safe and prosperous world that we need and that we seek. The economic system that we have, a global market economic system, or global capitalism, as it's sometimes called, does generate tremendous wealth, but not at all meeting the needs of all people. Many countries, many regions are left far behind lacking even today basic electrification, or children that can get into a schoolroom and learn, or people to have access to basic healthcare services, or to have enough to eat, because we have roughly 1 billion people with chronic insufficiency of just the energy intake, the caloric intake, and the protein intake. And we have billions of people with micronutrient deficiencies, therefore unhealthy because of imbalanced, inadequate diets, in a world of plenty where these problems of poverty and deprivation and lack of access to healthcare and lack of access to education could be solved if we devote our minds, our attention, and our finances to it, and could be solved very inexpensively compared to the great wealth of this planet. We have a world system, economic, social, and political, that does not lead to social justice, but leads to mass inequalities, gaps between racial groups because of continuing racial discrimination, racial hatred. I come from a country, the United States, that has a history of absolutely shocking racism against African American people and against indigenous populations that is not resolved to this very day. And all over the world, we see vast discrimination of indigenous populations. We see women facing tremendous difficulties, feeling huge inequalities in how they are remunerated, or the jobs that they can attain, or their place in the political system. So social inequalities remain enormous, and economic gaps between the rich and the poor continue to widen. We now have 2,775 billionaires in the world who, in the course of this pandemic, became much, much, much richer. These 2,775 people have an estimated combined wealth of $13.1 trillion. And it's estimated that that wealth increased during the pandemic by $5 trillion. Well, the money that these not even 3,000 people have could end all the poverty in the whole world. We could end extreme poverty. We could make sure every child's in school. We could have health care for all with the wealth just of these 2,775 people. So this world system, economic, social, political, doesn't produce social equality or social justice. Certainly, we know that the world economic system destroys the environment. It doesn't protect the environment. The way that we have been using fossil fuels irresponsibly and thereby emitting carbon dioxide, warming the planet. The way that we have been cutting down rainforests, destroying habitats, polluting the environment with all manner of chemical pollutants is shocking. The way that we have induced new zoonotic disease transmissions, such as COVID-19, and more will come because of the way that we are disrupting nature, proves that our system in no way by itself achieves sustainable development. And finally, the way that we go to war, the way that we have an arms race, the way that my country, the United States, points fingers at other countries and says to China, "You are evil," without recognizing all of the evils that the United States itself is doing. In other words, how each group in the world blames others without taking responsibility itself for what we need for a cooperative and peaceful world. I shudder to think about how many wars my country, the United States, has fought stupidly, destructively in modern times, from the Vietnam War and the destruction in Laos and Cambodia to the horrible wars in Central America, the so-called Contra Wars, to the wars in the Middle East that the United States has led in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, in Yemen. It's horrific. So our system doesn't produce peace. It generates hatred, even though we are guided by a United Nations charter that requires powerful countries like the United States not to launch wars by themselves, but rather to use the international rule of law and the UN Security Council to find a path to peace rather than war. But we're not doing it. And the arms races continue. And now a new arms race based on cyber technology is taking hold. So Professor Levi-Montalcini had the vision of sustainable development. The world's governments have adopted goals for sustainable development and climate safety, but we have not yet moved our economic, social, and political systems onto the path of true sustainable development. What do we need in order to accomplish that? I think we need fundamentally two things. First, we need a global plan of action. We need not only a European Green Deal, but now a global Green Deal, a plan that addresses climate change, a plan that addresses pollution, a plan that addresses sustainable land use, a plan that is prepared to face pandemic diseases, not unprepared as we were in early 2020 when COVID-19 broke out. Pope Francis, the greatest moral leader of the world, in his wonderful encyclical Laudato Si in 2015, which calls for this global responsibility, said the following. Let me quote Pope Francis. He said, "Interdependence obliges us to think of one world with a common plan. Yet the same ingenuity which has brought about enormous technological progress has so far proved incapable of finding effective ways of dealing with grave environmental and social problems worldwide. A global consensus is essential for confronting the deeper problems which cannot be resolved by unilateral actions on the part of individual countries." End quote. Pope Francis in Laudato Si calls for a common plan for our one world. The second thing we need, in addition to a common plan, is a common global ethic. And this brings us back to the profound wisdom, the insights, and the inspiration of Professor Rita Levi-Montalcini. Because a global ethic can bring the whole world to a shared perspective on how to act, on why to act, and on how to cooperate. Here again, I would refer to Pope Francis in his encyclical that followed Laudato Si, the encyclical Fratelli Tutti, which is a wondrous message of Pope Francis to the world on how to cooperate together. Because Fratelli Tutti is about encountering the other, like in the Bible story of the Good Samaritan, how to find trust and mutual interdependence and co-responsibility and true encounter and dialogue with the other. This is what we need across ethnic groups, across genders, across class divisions, and across national boundaries for cooperation across the countries of the world. So the plan of action and the global ethics are our great challenge. And on this, I want to share two closing thoughts. First, in terms of the plan, what to do, I think we're closing in on the core elements of a global plan of action. It is indeed to put into global practice the ideas of the European Green Deal, the shift to renewable energy, the shift to a digital economy, the shift to sustainable land use, so-called farm to fork program of the European Union, the shift to a circular economy where we close the waste cycle rather than putting out chemical wastes into the world, the shift to a social democratic ethos in which we take care of everybody through the budget and make sure that everybody has access to the core infrastructure and to the life essential services of healthcare, education, safe water, sanitation, and the other basic economic needs, modern energy services, and others. We need to finance such a global plan, and that will require global financial reform, especially to enable the poorer countries to access the tax revenues through tax reform and ending tax havens, and to be able to borrow on favorable terms so that those poorer countries can invest in the critical infrastructure to enable them to develop and to accelerate the progress of their material production and their well-being to escape from poverty. The second thing we need, and here is the fundamental lesson of Professor Levi-Montalcini and of the Trieste Declaration, we need to ensure that in the 21st century, the basic precepts of human rights and human duties are combined and are updated for the 21st century. And here I would like to close with just a modest proposal. In 2023, we will be celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was the starting point for the Trieste Declaration, because Professor Levi-Montalcini said, well, we have the Declaration of Rights, we need the responsibilities alongside those rights to ensure that those rights are actually realized everywhere. Well, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a remarkable document. It was adopted in 1948 by all of the United Nations member states. It was negotiated by that wondrous leader, Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And it was President Franklin Roosevelt who also inspired the idea of universal rights when he spoke in 1941 about the four freedoms, the freedom of belief, the freedom of expression, the freedom from economic want, and the freedom from fear. And on the basis of his vision of four universal freedoms achieved everywhere in the world, his wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, negotiated the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. What Professor Levi-Montalcini called for was an updating of the Universal Declaration. Now in 2023, we will be celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. What an amazing opportunity for young people around the world to say, yes, the Universal Declaration is ours, we embrace it, we will achieve it, and we will follow the inspiration of the Trieste Declaration to update the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to supplement it with the new rights that we must acknowledge in the 21st century and the responsibilities that go along with those rights. So currently, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights brilliantly envisages that human rights are in the service of the dignity of human beings everywhere and of the universal dignity of every human being, and that they include civil rights, political rights, economic rights, social rights, and cultural rights. I would suggest that there are at least three more basic rights that we should elaborate and recognize. First is the right to a safe physical environment, to a safe planet. Second is the right to beneficial technology, that new technologies like biotechnology and cyber technology, digital technology, should be used for the common good. And the third new right that I would inscribe inside the Universal Declaration is the right to human security, what President Roosevelt called freedom from fear, but I would call now human security. And that means the ability to be secure in a world where weapons threaten us with destruction. That means a world that is eliminating nuclear weapons, is eliminating weapons of mass destruction, and is reinforcing the precepts of international law and the preeminence of the United Nations for achieving world peace, to stop individual countries from abusing the peace. In order to have that expanded list of rights, economic, social, political, cultural, environmental, technological, human security, we need the duties that Professor Levi-Montalcini identified. And on this, and I'll close here, we need to recognize duties of several different kinds. First, our individual duties to respect the rights of others, our individual duties to be responsible as citizens, our individual duties to support the common good, including to pay our taxes fairly so that governments have the revenues to provide the services for those who urgently need them. But we also need duties for other groups in society as well. There are duties of companies, of businesses, of corporations that can't only focus on their financial bottom line, but must be responsible to all their stakeholders, to the communities where they operate, to their working staff, to their customers, to their global supply chains, to the citizens of the countries where they operate. We need duties for scientists and technologists, the basic point of Professor Levi-Montalcini. And we need, crucially, duties of governments. The duties of governments, in my view, are first and foremost to honor the United Nations Charter, to abide by the standards of international rule of law, to abide by the standards of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to abide by the treaties and agreements that they have signed, including agreements like the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement. I would add two fundamental responsibilities of government. First, for the rich countries to ensure adequate financing for the poorer countries to be able to achieve human dignity and to meet economic needs. In a rich world, nobody needs to suffer poverty or hunger or neglect or deprivation from basic services. And the rich countries have duties, not just rights, but duties to ensure that that is the case around the world. And finally is the duty for peace. No country should be threatening other countries, imposing unilateral sanctions, causing through frictions new Cold Wars. No country should be occupying other territories. No country should be engaging in bombing of civilian populations. We have a responsibility of our governments, most of all to ensure a peaceful world for the well-being of all of the peoples of the world. Well, thank you for letting me make these observations and share my thoughts with you. Thank you to young people for the commitment to sustainable development, to a just, fair, prosperous, environmentally sustainable, and peaceful world. thank you to the wonderful inspiration of Professor Rita Levi-Montalcini and to the Area Science Park and the United College of the Adriatic and the International Council of Human Duties for keeping this vision moving forward. And I believe as we move to the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, of putting into action the real steps that we need and we so much seek to build the future together that we want. Thank you so much. I'm most grateful to have the chance to be with you today. Bye-bye.
Well, I think that we can thank a lot Professor Sachs for this message, which is very, very, very direct, clear. I think that it's important from the very beginning when he linked the declaration, the Trieste Declaration, to the Agenda 2030 by the United States, which is what we are living today. So all the 17 points of the agenda are, and he was able to link all the many of the articles of the Trieste Declaration to the pillars of the global agenda by the United States. I think that, and it's also, I believe, we can say that the things, the suggestions, the last suggestions, the need for global action with the Green Deal, the common global ethic that he suggests as well. And he underlines the duties, the individual, the collective, and the governmental duties that we have to trigger. I think we have a few questions. The first, it's about the war. I think that Professor Dabulkar and Professor Sachs underlined a lot in many ways, and that the war is one of the most important and risky threat to the life of mankind. So it's I think it's important to see that at the end, and not only because we are living the war in these days, and Professor Sachs was talking about it, and the question we received was about it. What I think that the answer is clear. We can say that it's really, really clear in all these speeches. There's one more question by Vasil Karasanchin, and it was about the Trieste Declaration, the articles, but particularly it was, I think that Professor Paoletti can answer it. The question is if the declaration had been used, referenced in any government-led processes.
Yes, thanks for the question. I think the word adoption can be misinterpreted. Adoption means, as to the Human Duties Declaration, adoption by the community of scientists and intellectuals supporting it was not, at least certainly not yet, adopted by any government or international governmental institution like the United Nations. This is actually, as also Jeffrey Sachs said in his talk, this could be a good opportunity to do it in the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the San Francisco Declaration of Human Rights. However, the Declaration of Human Duties has been spread all over around, and it was the target and the object of many events, institutional events, and especially events between scientists, first of all, with Rita Levi-Montalcini herself, and the young people in many, many occasions. We reached the International Council of Human Duties, reached the point almost to have the declaration adopted by Rotary International, but this was not a successful process because at the time, in particular from the, let's say, a very important government in the world, there were not a total acceptance of the of some of the duties. So anyway, I think now we have in front of us the possibility of launching the idea. Of course, nobody believes that the declaration in the exact terms and words as it is now could be a final document for the United Nations. We are very well aware that, of course, a lot of negotiations should be, in case necessary, to obtain this goal, to achieve this goal. However, I think some old philosophers said, if you have a long journey in front of you, the best is you start soon. I think opportunities like we had today and involving important international scientific institutions, and as Jeffrey Sachs said, also progressively some governments and governmental institutions, more and more, I think it can be a step forward in that direction.
Thank you. I think I can make the other question that we received to Professor Dabakar and Professor Ruffo, if you would like to answer. It's very big, so you can just keep one point. But the question is, with the speed at which information travels today, but is it still possible to reconcile evidence-based decision-making and democratic process in a postmodern society? But in particular, what role can scientists play in this regard?
So maybe I can start. So it was the subject of one of my answers to the question of fake news. In fact, my point is that it's really a complex endeavor. So you must really put down a sort of multidisciplinary education that should cover both the sciences and the human sciences and philosophy. And the contribution of the scientists can be what I've called critical thinking. So in some sense, it's a slowdown of the process. So you should, against the speed of the process of information, you should oppose a word of caution that is should slow down and let you think. So this is something that, as a scientist, we are used to do. So and maybe more than other in society, and that we should share with the society at large.
Okay, maybe can I answer? Yes. No, I think I agree with Stefano that the correct word to use is misinformation. And I really think that against the virus of misinformation, the vaccination is critical thinking. And we have to, I don't think we should take the postmodern worldview as something given. I think scientists should really fight for re-establishing the Enlightenment values, where you give importance to evidence, to facts, a certain way of thinking. And it's really important that we are able to communicate this way of thinking, not only among scientists, that you use statistics, how you evaluate evidence, I think this has to be communicated also to people who are in the humanities, so that when they become policymakers, they sort of can understand how much you can believe in what you believe in, and how you weigh various information that is being thrown at you. It's a difficult challenge, but I think it's like trying to find a vaccination.
Right. But may I just add one little thing by my point of view as a journalist? I think that it's all these things that you said are important, and also that, of course, as journalists, we have some responsibilities, and it's not easy. But I think it also the duties of individuals that Jeffrey Sachs was talking about is important too. All the public should try to fight against fake news, for example, and should act with critical thinking. And I think also the importance of the education system, I think in these times is important. There are some questions that I think should be made to Professor Sachs, so I don't think it's useful now. I think that we can end. I have a question with Professor Paoletti. The last question is for you. And what now? Well, after this, you were talking about the anniversary 2023, of course, but can you see after this very interesting meeting today, which are the next things that can be done?
Well, I think we can start again from the scientific community. I'm not chauvinistic about the scientific community, as in particularly I noticed Stefan Rufo underlined 2 times. We don't want only scientists. We want humanists, or let's say not hard science or hard sciences only, but all kind of disciplines. However, my feeling is that there is an intrinsic strength if this kind of community comes back after 30 years. Unfortunately, almost half of the Nobel laureates who supported and contributed to the declaration already died. But there are, I'm sure, there are others, new, and especially new people. So starting from the scientific community, the intellectual community, I mean, everybody who feels close to the critical thinking that was mentioned, I think this could start making a network. A network today, fortunately, thanks to technology, it is easier to make this network. We already discussed with Jeffrey Sachs a few plans to have some institutions. So, of course, the international level of the action is absolutely mandatory, but we can start with some, for instance, of the United Nations institutions, UNEP, UNESCO, and so, and then trying to find a few governments. And already in the past, I know that some governments has been particularly attentive to this. So I mean, the International Council was relaunched just a couple of months ago, and so we are in the process of, in a way, warm up, if I can say, but certainly with the help of everybody, and started. So I want now to thank all of you, the scientists, of course, the coordinator, and especially the young friends and students from the United World College of Adriatic. This was the message of Rita Levi-Montalcini. She liked very much to speak, to stay with the young people and to speak to the young people. And when she said, be brave, and the next sentence, I care, this was her important message. So I think we need to start from the young generation.
I have nothing to add. I should thank all of you again, so I don't do again, and I'll thank the technical direction as well, and thank you to Sergio Paoletti and to all the other people who were here this afternoon. So thank you very much.
Thank you.